So aside from the CEO talking to people on Twitter and replying to an odd tweet here and there, the official channels of Chrono Odyssey have been pretty silent since the day that the beta has ended. That is to say, until now. They've posted a pretty lengthy developer's note update for us, telling us what they're focusing on in terms of improvements to the game before the next beta. So everything that's being talked about in this post, to my understanding from the wording in it, seems like stuff that they're going to be implementing before the next beta happens, the next public beta, whenever that is going to happen. I have no idea. I promise, I don't know. This is only the part 1. There's going to be a part 2 that's going to be posted sometime in the future, but in this first one, they've addressed a few things that to me seemed like some of the more common complaints and feedback about the game from people. Not only is it quite lengthy, it involves a lot of game dev sort of jargon. Now, I want to make something abundantly clear. I am not an expert in this area whatsoever, but I'm making this video to summarize this post in layman's terms for people like myself so that we can understand it better, because the technical stuff in the post kind of makes it hard to read and hard to digest. So since I am not an expert, like I said, in this area, this summary in layman's terms comes from just my own research and asking people who have worked in game development that I know if I'm kind of getting things correctly. So it's not going to be a bunch of technical jargon in this. It's going to be pretty much a summary of their post, the part 1 that they've posted of the developer's notes, in terminology that is a lot easier to digest for regular people like us that don't work in game development. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the post addresses number 1, animations and combat responsiveness, number 2, performance and optimization, and number 3, graphics. So let's get into animations and combat responsiveness first of all. The first thing they talk about here is hit feedback inconsistency. So they're speeding up how often your game and the server talk to each other, which is what they mean by accelerating packet transmission. So this will greatly improve desync, which isn't only a huge benefit in PvE, but also in PvP. And as far as I understand, this will also make for a smoother experience for people who are kind of in that mid-range of latency. So if you're somebody who plays with around 120 to 180 ms, it won't reduce your latency by any means, but it will make playing the game with that latency feel a little bit better. The other bullet under hit feedback inconsistency is in the build that we played, all character movements was being sent to the server altogether. So any way that your character moves in combat, your attacks, your dodges, as well as your walking, your running, your sprinting, whatever, all of that was being bundled together and sent to the server. And they believe that this is what was causing some of the mismatching that is giving the combat that odd, hard to describe feeling of jank. They're looking to separate movement and combat and have the information be sent separately to the server, which means that if one area lags, it won't drag the other one down with it. Games like Dark Souls and Monster Hunter do it this way, so it will generally make for an added layer of polish when it comes to movement and combat, so that's good to hear. The next bullet under this section is class weapons. So they are mentioning adding a system called the Matrix that allows you to choose from 4 progression paths per weapon, which makes 12 in total. So the aim with this is to diversify skill usage of each weapon. This introduces a lot more variety and build creativity. So if 2 players are using the same 2 weapons, their builds could potentially differ drastically. Regardless, this is a good change in my opinion, because this was one of the very common complaints as well. Every weapon has a skill tree, but a lot of the kind of points that you put into them goes into passives and improving existing active skills that you already picked. So if you strip those things away, there weren't that many unique skills to choose from and not much diversity when it came to it, especially if it was on weapons that could either tank or DPS. That narrowed down the variety even more. So there's going to be more build diversity with this change, and it's always a welcome change, obviously. And like I said earlier, this matrix system will be available in the next test, whenever that is, but that is what they said, that is what they mentioned. So we'll be able to, whenever the next beta is, we'll be able to test out this new system. Side note, I've never seen, I don't know what this is. I've never heard of it. I've never seen it before. So don't ask me to clarify. I actually genuinely don't know. It's the first time I'm hearing about it. The next bullet point here is the camera. So the general quality of life camera improvements that combined will make the combat experience a lot better. So they're fixing an issue with the camera angle affects visibility when you're too close to walls or parts of the environment. So think like if you're too close to a wall on your character and the camera just kind of like freaks out or zooms in very close because the wall is making the camera zoom in. They're going to be fixing that. I don't know how, probably by making them go transparent if your camera's kind of clipping through it, but we'll see. That's a welcome change. They're addressing abrupt screen change when switching targets. Camera angle, this is the important one here, the camera angle being too close to the target in melee combat. This is one of my own personal major feedbacks that I've given them from playing in Souls games. When I fight bosses, I do like to lock onto the bosses, but what the camera was doing if you played a melee character is that when you were point blank in melee range next to a boss that was very big and tall, the kind of point of reference of the lock-on target was very high up in the air. So it was having that effect where if you lock onto a boss that's very big in Elden Ring, or like if you're fighting a dragon, you lock onto the dragon's head, the camera was pointing too far up and it was just making the entire experience very bad. So I pretty much, in the public test, I chose not to use the targeting system whatsoever at that point because of that, largely. So it's really nice for me personally to see that addressed, but for pretty much every person that's going to be playing a melee character, that's going to be a good change. And then a few other things like camera reset after combat and ensuring that skills are cast based on camera direction and not where the character itself is facing. The next bullet point here is controls. So they're pretty much increasing the duration of hit stun on enemies, which is that flinch animation from heavy hits on enemies. So right now it's at 1 second, which might feel like it's not impactful enough and there's maybe not that much time to follow it up with anything, especially on slower weapons like Greatsword. So by increasing it to 2 to 4 seconds, which is what they're doing, it will make your skills have more oomph to them. And in general, your efforts in combat will feel more rewarding with this change. 4 seconds might sound like maybe too long to some people, but we don't know how they're going to apply these between like regular mobs and bosses. I hope they can find that sweet spot with making the player's effort feel more impactful, but also not trivializing the challenge too much. But that pretty much summarizes the first area. The second area that they addressed is performance and optimization. This is a very big one also. So the first bullet point under here is GPU and rendering overload. So they are restructuring how assets are rendered to reduce GPU load and improve real-time performance. That sounds good. They're essentially changing how the game sends visual information to your graphics card so that the game runs better. So they talk about nanite geometry, which is a feature in Unreal Engine 5 that it pretty much makes the game look really good, but it's very heavy to render, which causes a lot of performance issues. So now what they're doing is they're only going to keep that system for important stuff like major landmarks or close-up models, and instead of using it on the entire world like they were doing before, which is crazy, but mundane things like barrels, rocks, crates, tree branches, and so on, like little tiny details around the world that you don't really care about too much, they're switching to a different system called ISM. And so the way it works is it essentially, instead of telling your GPU, draw one barrel here, then draw another barrel here, then draw another barrel here, what it does, that system is, it says draw 10 of this exact barrel over here in one single command. So that significantly reduces the load on your graphics card because it reduces the amount of times that the game has to communicate with your graphics card to render something. So overall, this just means that they're keeping the important stuff looking good, while the mundane, unimportant stuff will need a lot less back and forth communication with your graphics card to render, which is a good change. It'll improve game performance, especially in heavily populated areas, more frames, and in some cases, shorter loading screens as well. The next bullet point here is, interestingly, developer efficiency. Development efficiency. To make development more efficient, they say they will be switching towards reusable environmental assets to improve development efficiency and runtime performance. Now, don't get scared at the word reusable here. The key thing is that they specifically say reusable environmental assets. So this means things like rocks, barrels, crates, wall patterns, fences, rooftops, doors, like little terrain parts, things like that. So what they're looking to do is, instead of crafting every single one of those things individually from scratch, they'll be pretty much using Lego pieces to build them, like internally in the engine. This is not only good for the devs because it speeds up the process of creating the environment, but for the players players too, because this will also generally help performance. They're only doing this with environmental assets, so this doesn't include enemy models, so it doesn't mean that they will be copy pasting the same enemy model more. There would have been that would have been referred to as enemy assets or creature models, which isn't included in the post. So this change generally is not noticeable visually, but it speeds up development and improve performance, so pretty much both sides benefit. In the second paragraph under this bullet, they do a whole technical breakdown of trim sheets. So they're essentially saying the same thing as what I just explained previously with the environmental assets, except instead of environmental assets as like crates, like barrels, they will be doing that with textures. So for example, instead of creating a completely unique brick wall from scratch, they will be creating their own sheet of brick wall texture and cutting it and applying that to like the surface of a building and then making it look scuffed or whatever. So stuff like that. It's the same thing, but for certain surfaces and surface textures pretty much. So same idea to speed up development and also improve performance as well. The next bullet here is memory usage. So this one has a ton of technical jargon. So you're familiar with what collision is. It's the invisible hitbox that determines where your character will bump into a wall or an enemy, where you can't go through them. So that's what collision is. In the old build, the game was loading all collision data for the entire world at the same time as the graphics data, which means that when you're in a zone, everything that you see visually, or even that's too far away for you to see, has already been loaded, and the collision data for everything, like every wall, every rock, every enemy in those zones, again, even things that you can't see, was also loading at the same time. This is very inefficient and heavy on your computer. So they're splitting that up. So the game now will only load the visuals of the environment, but the collision data will only be loaded when you kind of get closer to it. So this will be a big improvement to loading times. They're also simplifying those collision hitboxes. So now instead of having physics on each little polygon of like a tree, of the collision of like a tree or a rock or whatever, it just creates a general sort of shape around it, which will reduce the load on your GPU and CPU as well. So zones that you're not next to will now unload when they're not in use. So only the active layers of the world will be loading from now on. If it's not relevant to where you are, it won't use that memory at all, which again will improve performance. These are very good changes. They will help general performance by reducing stutter, faster loading screens and transitions. So, you know, when you're like the world is seamless, it doesn't have any like transitions or anything, but you know, when you kind of ride into like a new looking zone and there's a little bit of that, there's no loading screen, but there's a little bit of that stutter, like a little FPS drop, a bit because you can tell the game is loading new stuff. These changes are the ones that will reduce that specifically the most. Tremendous. Well, hopefully that's what it's all aimed at, but that's the hope, right? But yeah, that's kind of the aim of it. The next bullet point here is stable performance across various system specs. So this was interesting. Staying on topic of loading things in a smarter way, this section is essentially saying that the game will auto-detect how powerful your computer is, and based on that will adjust what it loads, how far it loads it, and how detailed it is. So this is a good thing for people with lower-end PCs. Things in the far distance will look slightly shittier, which will be barely noticeable for you, but will reduce the load on your PC, so you can have a much smoother experience, and it will happen automatically. And then the last point that they addressed here is graphics. So under graphics, the first bullet point that we have here is rendering efficiency. So in this section, they're talking about consolidating shaders. Pretty much the game is doing too much repetitive work when making sure things look good. Instead of having all of those things load individually, one by one, they're cleaning that up and creating essentially a universal template for a high quality shader that does all of it. So instead of the game loading 50 shaders, it will load one shader that will handle the job of those 50 shaders. So this means higher frame rate and no visual downgrade. There's no like kind of visual trade-off to this, from what I understand. And then the next bullet point addresses water surfaces. So this is insane. The current build renders water movement in a completely psychotic way. So when your character moves through some water, the engine calculates the math of the physics of the ripples and renders them all individually in real time, which is obviously a huge hit on performance, especially in an MMO where other players might be doing it around you at the same time. So they're reducing how much of that movement is happening and streamlining the physics side of it to have the engine do less math. So this will make the water look less realistic, but it will be at the cost of much smarter optimization, which I think is a trade all of us are willing to take. The next bullet here is screen transition and quality. So aside from adjusting a few issues with blur and characters leaving echoes, the big thing here is that they're moving from TAA to TSR. So all this means is that the anti-aliasing, the stuff that makes the game look smooth and doesn't give it like those sharp edges that make it look too video gamey, the anti-aliasing, it will look a lot better without making the whole game look blurry. And they're also adding, and this is a big one, they're adding DLSS support, which is huge. It's pretty much a system that renders the game at a lower internal resolution, but uses AI to upscale the game on your screen. So this is a setting that pretty much uses black magic to make your game look really good and run infinitely better. It's black magic because it seems like there's no downside to it. So this is good. And I mean, DLSS is an NVIDIA specific thing. If you don't have an NVIDIA GPU, they have the equivalent for other GPUs as well, and like some of the older ones as well. So it's not just DLSS. They have the alternative for other GPUs as well in there. And the last bullet point here is lighting, which is also a big one. This was a massively reported thing. The lighting in the game felt completely broken and way too intense, so it's nice to see them address it. So overall, they're removing a bunch of unnecessary lights. They're switching to cluster-based lighting system, which pretty much groups nearby lights together and processes them more efficiently, which will reduce strain on your GPU and fix the issues where in-game lighting would randomly flicker, and also prevents the world from looking washed out from scenes being too overly lit. Those two were such a huge complaint from people, and those two issues made the game look so ugly because the lighting was just completely out of whack. So I'm really glad to see this addressed, because that was also like one of the largest complaints that both I and my community had. It's just the lighting. Like the game would look nice, but the lighting would just make it look very washed out and sort of like a lot lower quality, because it would just wash out all the colors, drain it of all color, and just kind of reduce the intensity of shadows, making the game just look kind of cheap, like you're running it on low graphics. So that's pretty much the entire post. It is pretty lengthy, but the whole objective was to summarize this quickly for you in terms that you can understand, so you know what they're going to be doing to the game internally now. Maybe you understand it a little bit better. They're making some good changes. The three major things that they addressed are some of the most popular or common, I guess, not popular, but common complaints about the game after the beta. So I mentioned this earlier at the beginning, but there is going to be a part 2. So in part 2, I don't know when it's going to come, the part 2 of this developer's note, they are planning to address sound, UI and UX, gameplay flexibility, in-game guidance, balance, content flow, progression, replayability, social features, narrative, server stability, and bug fixes. So a lot more to come. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of technical jargon involved in that too. So subscribe to the channel for the video explaining that whenever it comes out, similarly to this one. And then at the end, and I quote what they say is, "We don't plan on rushing ahead without first getting things right. We want the next version of Chrono Odyssey to reflect all the hard work and honest feedback that have gone into this process. Our focus remains on quality and delivering a more polished, complete experience." So now we're pretty much in the waiting room for developers' notes part 2, where they address all of those things. And then after that, obviously the beta, whenever it happens. I don't know when it's going to be. I have no idea. Typically, if I know something that I'm not allowed to say, I usually say that. In this situation, I genuinely don't know when it's going to happen. It's good to see this level of detailed communication. It's not just, hey, we understand you guys didn't like the lighting. We'll work on that. We are aware of your feedback and we are working on resolving it internally. Bullshit ass, fuck ass, not answer. So it's good to see communication like this that's very direct, very open, and very meticulous. So that'll be it from me today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe, like the video, follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/LaufieLOL. I stream almost every day. I've been playing Terra Classic on the private servers, so I've been having a lot of fun. And whenever the next Chrono Odyssey beta happens, I'm gonna be there. But until the next video, whatever it is that I post, whether it's developer notes part 2 or my next lore video, I will see you then, and have a good day.